Hello and welcome to week 6 of plant biology. We're moving right along through the material, and I hope you're finding the reading and other activities informative to help you guys better understand how plants are parts of our natural world and how they interact with the world around them. This week we're going to be working on learning about water movement through plants as well as solute movement through plants, and talking about soils. Those two things are very closely linked to one another. The source that plants get their water from is from the soil, so it makes good sense to talk about water transport through plants and soils at the same time. So when we're starting out with our reading this week, I want you to focus on reading chapter 30. Reading in chapter 30 and 31 of the Biology 2E OER textbook. The part of chapter 30 that I'd like you to focus on this week is section 30.5, and that's really talking about the transport of water and solutes in plants. The first bit is talking about water potential. I would say don't worry so much about the math portion of that reading. If you were interested in going into research and understanding how the actual math about how water potential works to move through plants, I'd say read it and understand it. But I think for an introductory course, that math is somewhat unnecessary. But it is important that you understand the underlying concept behind water potential and how that's moving water through plants. So instead of focusing on struggling through that math, I'd say understand the concepts presented, especially in figure 30.32 in that book. If you can understand the concepts involved in that figure, you're going to be in a very good place to understand how water is moving in plants in that specific way. Some key words that we're going to need to know moving through this chapter is transpiration. This is water loss through the evaporation at the surface of the leaves. This off-gassing of water is driving water through plant systems, and it's really an important concept to understand for water movement through plants. Transpiration is the main water driver through the xylem of the plants. I'm going to refer you to figure 30.34 for good understanding of the concepts behind water movement via transpiration. Water moving from the root system up through the xylem to the leaves is not the only way that things move through plants. So leaves are photosynthetic, and that's where plants are sort of developing their energy stores from. That energy needs to be able to move back down through the rest of the plant, back down to the roots where they're not photosynthesizing. And so there needs to be two-way water movement, and also work at understanding the transport of photosynthates through the phloem of the plant, and understand that this is an active process and it takes energy, which is very much unlike water transport through the xylem, which is very passive and it uses that sort of water potential. That should get you guys pretty well through understanding how water is being transported through plants. Again, that's section 5 of chapter 30, so 30.5 in the Biology 2E OER textbook. When we're going to talk about soils, that's going to start out in chapter 31 of that same textbook. And it's going to start out not necessarily talking specifically about soils, but starting out with the nutritional needs of plants. Now, that's important because most of those nutritional needs, other than energy via photosynthesis, is coming up from the root system into the rest of the plant. So it's important to understand what the nutritional needs are of plants so that you can have a good understanding of why they're doing what they're doing. They're motivated to absorb these nutrients from the soil around them to survive. And then after we talk about the nutritional needs of plants, then we really start talking about soils in particular. You can take entire classes, entire university course curricula based on soil science. So understand that this is a very, very brief introduction into soil science, but again, for a general introduction, this should be pretty good jumping off point for an introductory material on soil sciences. One of the things that's really important to understand about soils is that it's much, much more than just dirt. Soil is this complex ecosystem area where you have living things and dead things and water and nutrients all mixed together in this beautiful mess that we call soil. So soil is very, very complex, and it really doesn't get the credit that it deserves by most people. We're going to start out looking at soil formation. So how do soils form? They don't just magically appear. They develop over time. There's a sort of an evolutionary type process that goes into the development of soils. We're going to look at the physical properties of soil. So there are abiotic or not living things in soil. There's sort of rocky structure or sand and clays and things like that that are not living. So looking at those physical properties of soil is an important consideration when we're trying to understand how plants are going to interact with the soil. Is that soil very rocky and loose and doesn't give good sort of root to soil contact? Those are important considerations if you're a plant. If it's big air spaces, that roots can move through easily, good healthy soils that provide good soil root contact, those are all important considerations when we're talking about the health of plants. So understanding how soils are structured is important. It's also important to know how plants get the nutrition that they need from the soils or from their substrate. It could be that they have a non-soil substrate. One of the concepts that's involved are called mycorrhizal associations. Those are plant-fungus interactions. The fungus grows in cooperation with the roots of the plants. These mycorrhizal associations are critically important for plants to grow healthier. And in some cases, they are truly a limiting factor for life for some plants. So mycorrhizal associations, definitely something you should look at. There's other ways that plants gain nutrients. Some are parasitic, so they grow at the detriment of their host plant. Some are saprophytes, so they might grow on decaying matter, which is a very strange sort of way of understanding plants. But there are some plants out there that are saprophytes. They're what are called symbionts. Those are plants that are growing in association for mutual benefit with another organism, usually another plant. And then one of the sort of more charismatic, non-traditional routes that plants gather nutrients are through insectivorous plants. So things like Venus flytraps, pitcher plants, and things like that. It's important to know that those plants are consuming those insects to basically pick up those nutrients from those insects. They're not harvesting energy from those insects. They're harvesting the nutrients that's contained in the bodies of those insects, and the plants are then putting those to use for their own growth and development needs. Very strange sort of pathway. Plants can be very, very fascinating organisms, and the diversity of plants is staggering at even a local or a global scale. So again, we're going to look at water transport in plants, transpiration, transport of photosynthates, nutritional needs of plants, what sort of nutrients do they need, and then look at soils, so where do they get those nutrients from. So chapter 30.5 in the textbook, as well as chapter 31, both in Biology 2E. Hope you have a great week, and see you next week.